This episode is sponsored by Hired.com. Every week on Hired, they run an auction where over 1,000 tech companies in San Francisco, New York, and LA bid on Ruby developers, providing them with salary and equity up front. The average Ruby developer gets an average of 5 to 15 introductory offers and an average salary offer of $130,000 a year. Users can either accept an offer and go right into interviewing with the company or deny them without any continuing obligations. It's totally free for users, and when you're hired, they give you a $2,000 signing bonus as a thank you for using them. But if you use the Ruby Rogues link, you'll get a $4,000 bonus instead. Finally, if you're not looking for a job but know someone who is, you can refer them to Hired and get a $1,337 bonus if they accept the job. Go sign up at hired.com/RubyRogues. Snap is a hosted CI and continuous delivery that is simple and intuitive. Snap's deployment pipelines deliver fast feedback and can push healthy builds to multiple environments automatically or on demand. Snap integrates deeply with GitHub and has great support for different languages, data stores, and testing frameworks. Snap deploys your application to cloud services like Heroku, DigitalOcean, AWS, and many more. Try Snap for free. Sign up at snapci.com/RubyRogues. This episode is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean is the provider I use to host all of my creations. All the shows are hosted there, along with any other projects I come up with. Their user interface is simple and easy to use, their support is excellent, and their VPSs are backed on solid-state drives and are fast and responsive. Check them out at DigitalOcean.com. If you use the code RubyRogues, you'll get a $10 credit.
Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 233 of the Ruby Rogues podcast. This week on our panel we have Jessica Kerr.
Good morning.
Coraline Ada Emke. I'm Charles Max Wood from DevChat.tv, and we're going to start out talking about onboarding new developers. Coraline, you kind of brought this up. What kind of brought you into this, and what did you think about it?
Well, I just started a new job. I'm working at Pulsefinch now, which is a company that makes software for automating a lot of workflow processes for doctors and nurses. So having just gone through an onboarding experience, I realized how critical it is that the onboarding experience be as positive and productive as possible. And I wanted to see if other people have some ideas on how to make that a more effective sort of thing, and also talk about what some of the challenges are, both from the person who's being onboarded and as the engineer is doing the onboarding.
I can tell you how not to do it. I've been through that a few times.
Yeah?
Yeah. I had a couple of concepts a year or so ago, and they were basically, that's the backlog, go for it.
So starting out on bugs and features, there's no sort of context.
Right, somebody spent a half hour walking me through the code, and then, and the other thing was everybody kind of does different parts of the system, so talk to somebody before you actually pick up a feature. So it wasn't even that I could just pick up a ticket and run with it, or pick up a story and run with it. It was actually just
talk to all these people, or one of these people that you don't know who it is and you've barely met them.
Yeah, and make sure that they're not already working on it, even though it says that it's available to be claimed in the backlog.
So, do you think that was a reflection of the general culture of the engineering group once you sort of found your feet there?
I don't think I ever did quite find my feet there. I kind of gave up on it when we quit the contract. But it was really rough because I couldn't actually contribute anywhere. I think I finished like 3 or 4 stories in like 3 or 4 weeks. So they weren't happy with me because I wasn't contributing, but I'd get halfway done with the story and then somebody would jump in and say, oh, I've already been working on that.
Oh, yeah, I've been there too. Yeah. Or, oh no, I just rewrote all that code and didn't tell you and didn't even delete yours, so you didn't even know and you kept working on it for a week.
Yep.
And there's an important point here, which is if you start on a new job or a new team and you don't feel productive and they don't think you're productive, that's not your fault. It's pretty much never your fault because you're the new person and they're the ones with the information. And onboarding a new team member is the job of the team. You can't onboard yourself.
Yeah, I don't want to absolve anyone of any blame if they don't try.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I totally agree with you.
I think there are some responsibilities you have as that new dev, but there are definitely things that the team can do to enable that. I think that you have a responsibility to ask questions when you don't understand, even at the risk of, you feel like you're asking really simple, really stupid questions. It's still your responsibility to get that information, but that has to be a collaborative and cooperative effort.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, and if you ever ask a question and then they make you feel stupid, well, that's like seriously defeating because it tells you not to ask questions, and if you can't ask questions, then you can't learn anything, and you certainly can't be productive.
Yeah.
So in your experiences collectively, who have been the people who did the onboarding? Do you think it's important for it to be a senior engineer who has a great sense of the entire system, or something that's distributed across the team, or even, this just came to mind, a newer person who's gone through that same sort of experience of trying to learn what's potentially a really complex system?
I think it really depends on the team and how they approach this. So I have worked on teams that were successful at onboarding because they essentially put you on the parts of the system that were easy to pick up. So there was some kind of crawler or bot or some self-contained part of the system that, an adapter that you could write that you basically only had to understand the endpoints on one end and the endpoints on the other end, and not necessarily have a total and complete understanding of the entire system. And that gave you an understanding of at least one edge of the system, and then they could bring you in after that. And so in those cases, the newer people could bring you on board because they could introduce you to that part of the system. A few other things, though, that I've seen or that I've been around are places where you kind of have to understand the whole system, or at least understand the overall approach to the problem. And in those cases, you usually need a guide. I don't know if they need to be a senior person or not senior person or the newest person or whatever, but they at least need to know where some of the landmines are and know who to refer you to if you run into something and you have a question. So they can tell you where the answer is if they don't have it.
I think one of the things too is that a lot of people, they have a lot of junior developers entering our companies now as a result of like boot camps and programs like that. And a lot of the work you do in a boot camp is greenfield application development. And when you come into an actual company, an actual workforce, and see your first legacy app, that can be really overwhelming. And actually, we don't want monoliths anymore. We want generally service-oriented architectures, which I hate that term, but especially if you're presented with a dozen services, it can be really hard to know where to start to implement a feature and what sort of dependencies there are between the applications. The minefield is multiplied in that case.
Yeah, one thing that's rough about services is the connections are there, the dependencies are there, but they're often not documented.
Yeah.
Exactly. Documentation is something we have a lot of problems with in general. And I think especially with services, we haven't figured out how to effectively document those. It's either really granular at the, this is the API call and this is the inputs it expects, or else it's so broad that you can't map it to individual services.
Yeah.
Another thing that I've seen is that you also get in where it's like, oh, well, everybody knows.
That's the worst.
Well, that's the other thing I hear against the documentation. And
except that everyone doesn't.
But everybody knows that until you get somebody new who doesn't. And then,
And then they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what everybody knows. And they don't realize how contextual that knowledge is. And that's when it's really useful to have the new person, like, writing a wiki and onboarding the next person and generally having that awareness or making training materials. So I joined Stripe 4 weeks ago, so I'm also onboarding still. And Stripe has like 10 new employees a week. So the onboarding has gotten pretty professional, and it's definitely evolving, but there's official people in charge of onboarding. So at the company level, there's a whole lot of sessions and informational dissemination opportunities that are outside the team. And then in the meantime, I have a spin-up buddy on my team who's working with me to get on board with the particular tasks the team is doing. Now, in this case, there's so many new employees coming on all the time that onboarding is clearly a first-class activity.
Right.
That it just helps that it's that obvious, because onboarding should always be a first-class activity. It's kind of like if you don't have deployment automation, then any change is going to be painful and you're not going to make any changes and your software won't get good as quickly. It's the same thing. Your team can't grow and your team can't get better quickly until you prioritize onboarding and training.
I think maybe one of the challenges is that as developers, we tend to focus on the technical details and not recognize that software is essentially a people problem. And onboarding is one of those areas where that becomes really, really clear that it's more about getting the person comfortable, being the person to be a contributor, and maybe less about the mechanics of the code.
Yesterday, I asked one of my teammates if I could just sort of shadow her and just watch what she was doing and for a couple hours of her video chat. And she was like, yeah, sure. And then she was working on something. She's like, I actually have no idea how to do this task. And I was like, cool. You know more than me. She's like, I'd probably not. But what she did know that I didn't was the company culture ways to find out how to do that task, where to post in Slack, where to look on our internal documentation sites, what readmes to read, and how to search all of our internal repos. So it wound up being incredibly more useful to me because instead of learning how to do one thing, I learned more about how to learn how to do all the things.
Slack, I think, presents some opportunities and also some challenges. At HealthFinch, we have 67 Slack channels, and we're just an 8-person engineering group and about a 38-person company. So it can be hard to figure out, what's the appropriate venue for asking this question. Not just who the right people are, but where do you even start?
Yeah,
but
exactly.
Slack does have that, sort of equalizing effect too, that in theory, if people are effectively using Slack, and I think that comes back to whether or not you're a primarily remote team or not, it does give you the opportunity to voice a question to a broader range of people who can potentially answer those questions.
Ooh, suggestion. So at Stripe, one of our 400 and something channels is called Ask Anything, and that's a great place. I can always go there and ask where to ask.
Yeah, that's something that I found that was really helpful, is just having at least a few people who were responsive enough to, take us to the right place and go in the right direction.
How do you think the onboarding experience can or should be different for remote employees versus on-site employees?
That's really tricky, I've found, especially if you have a team that is mostly all in one place, and then you have a few remote people. If you're going to do that, you have to make remote the remote communication channels the primary channels. Otherwise, you're just going to have somebody that's sitting out there in La La Land who isn't connected with the team. They're having conversations in the hallway. They have an impromptu meeting on the couches, and then 3 weeks later you're going, why the heck are you doing that? We all decided we were going to do something a little bit different. And then it turns out, no, we told remote guy. And that really sucks.
I heard a story recently about a remote developer on a mainly in-person team, and his team lead made an offhand comment on in one of the video hangouts that's basically said, Slack, who uses Slack? And that was incredibly alienating to the remote developer because that was literally her only way to communicate with the team. And to see it being dismissed by the team lead was really an indication that remote culture was not something that was valued at all.
That's really sad.
Yeah, and I think that beyond the onboarding, if you're going to have a remote culture, you have to do away with those ad hoc meetings. You have to make sure that things are at the very least documented, if not, always collaborated on via video chat or via Slack or whatever other channels are available to you. But I don't know, I almost wish that as part of onboarding, you could make a decision as to, is this really the company for me in a way that was, not impactful to your career. I wish there was a trial period so that you could sort of put each other out and say, is this person going to be a good contributor? And is this company actually going to support me in my development endeavors? So I wonder if a contract to hire thing for remote developers would be helpful so that both the company and the developer could test each other out.
Mm-hmm.
There's another challenge with remote that I've noticed because I am remote at a company that's mostly on site, but my team, there's only one of us on site, so we're practically all remote. So it's kind of a hybrid situation. But I've noticed that starting out remote, and we don't have a lot of structure. It's very pick what's most important and work on that. And here's a bunch of information so that you can determine what's most important. I'm really struggling to get into the rhythm of what is it like to be remote at Stripe. So I've started asking people if I can shadow them and see how they work. But I kind of feel like part of onboarding is getting into the socio-technical system that is the code plus the coders. That is us plus the code we work on. And when we respond to the code and change the code and it gets better, and that's awesome. But coming in from outside, I'm not part of that yet. I guess the other side of it would be adopting a new technology.
I love that term for your technical system. I think that's really a valuable perspective on what you're expected to be part of as a developer.
Yeah, I got that from Michael Nygaard. So I need to know the people who to ask to find the place in the code, and I need to be able to ask both the code and the people questions. But as I contribute, as I write code, or as I troubleshoot code, I'm becoming part of that system and I'm integrating myself. But so I'm kind of like, don't stress out, Jess. Yes, you don't know what you're doing yet, and you don't know what to do next, but you're going to get there as I work my way into that system.
One interesting thing that I've seen done by several companies now is measuring the time to first commit to production or time to first deploy to production. And I'm interested in hearing people's thoughts on whether that's a valuable metric and whether that's a valuable objective to have as a new hire.
I'll talk about Stripe again. On our first, I think it was my second day, every engineer deploys to production, and what they deploy is their little entry into the hard-coded data that feeds, I think it's about.stripe.com, or the little public-facing website that shows everything that works with Stripe. So we sort of push ourselves into production immediately. So we've technically done a prod deploy very early. That's empowering.
I made my first commit to production on my third day. Test for on Monday and got code actually deployed to production on Wednesday, which felt really good. But I think that in some places it's kind of an artificial measure. Like, I don't know what you described at Stripe, just seems to me as not to be really critical, but a little bit contrived. Like, it's a milestone that you can say you hit, but is it really adding value? Should the measure actually be, when are you adding value to your application environment? I think that might be like an objective measure of what the onboarding process, how effective the onboarding process actually is. Like, how quickly can you become productive given the circumstances that we put you in as a new dev?
Maybe if you measure value in a lot of different ways.
That's true.
Because there's a lot of different ways. I wonder, Avdi, if you have any opinions on whether there's a lot of things in common between onboarding onto a team and onboarding onto like a project, maybe an open source project that people collaborate on, that we want to continually bring people into.
Yes, both processes suck.
I mean, we talked about remote onboarding.
Both processes are full of those horrible tasks that everybody gets out of the way the first time, thinks this is terrible, somebody should document it, and then immediately forgets about it because they've gotten over that hump and they have what to do.
So, Jessica, I think you made an interesting point about onboarding onto an open source project. One of the things that I try and do in my projects is go into the issues list and add a tag for things that are beginner-friendly, things that don't require a lot of context or a good working knowledge of how the overall system works, things that you can contribute to right away and feel good about having made a contribution. I think being beginner-friendly in that way is one way we can make that experience better for new devs.
Yeah. As a team member, don't pick up those tasks without asking the new devs whether they're already working on it.
Yeah, I think what I ask for in my open source projects is for people to claim the ticket, just add a comment that says, I'm working on this. And then I have, then we're not duplicating effort. I've had situations where two people worked on a feature and I had to pick between pull requests. And it's not a fun position to be in, and it's not fun to be on the receiving end of that either, where you put work into it, and then you find out that, someone else did it already, or someone else did it even at the same time, and your work was basically for nothing.
Yeah, that sucks.
That can be really discouraging. When you talk about that same situation happening in the workplace, Jessica, is that something that you've actually experienced?
Oh, well, Chuck was talking about having
okay, that's right.
On the list, and I have also experienced that with like team members who are more interested in plowing ahead than in collaborating with me.
I really I'm coming around to the opinion that collaboration is an essential skill for you to have mastered before you can call yourself a senior dev. I don't think we focus enough on the social aspects of coding, and we need to adjust our expectations of what it means to be senior. You should be a mentor. You should be able to talk to people. You should be able to train new people. You should be empathetic. You should be collaborative. Those are essential skills for being the sort of resource of the organization that comes along with being a senior dev. It's not about your coding experience, your architecture skills in isolation. It's got to be how effective you are as a member and a leader of a team.
That's beautiful. I think we should write that up so I can tweet it because I can't agree enough.
My last job, we did a lot of thinking about what it means to be a senior dev, and unfortunately we had a lot of disagreements about what that meant, especially being a senior dev who was remote and not adjusting the expectations for some of the relationships you can form with people in a larger organization when you are remote.
Here's an interesting point. A lot of orgs are moving toward multiple tracks of advancement. You've got the management track and the individual contributor track. But I think you bring up a point that what a lot of people think of as individual contributor is code, but there's somewhere in between that is not management, but it is technical leadership and involves bringing the rest of the team up and being that communication hub and collaborating and hooking people together and being really good at communication, as opposed to just writing good software on your own when you have a project that you can just ignore everybody relatively. It's degrees. So when we call the track individual contributor, what? I think we're really missing something.
So I can jump in here a little bit because, and David and I talked about this a few weeks ago on this show, where one of the first things I did when I was onboarded at crimereports.com was set up the CI machine. So that wasn't code. It didn't show up in the repo. All it did was give us another way of kind of getting feedback from our code so that we could evaluate where we were at. You know, a lot of times somebody's really good at asking the critical questions. Somebody's really good at facilitating communication in Slack or in person or somewhere else. There are a lot of unmeasurable things that make you an individual contributor that don't necessarily show up as lines of code or stories.
Because most of our contribution is collaborative. Yeah, and Corlin brought up value. And if you chase value in terms of shipped business features, I think you miss a lot of that because really we've got to evaluate value at a team level. So maybe it should be more like when you bring a new person on board, you're investing resources in that person. Team velocity, if you want, the team value level is going to decrease for a while, and then at some point it's going to go back up again. Maybe that's the point that we should aim to identify.
Yeah, I think this is where retrospectives are really highly valuable because then you can start to evaluate. We're going to try this. We're going to try that. We're going to try something else. This is working, this isn't working, this really isn't working.
Right, and that continuous integration that you set up is boosting the whole team, even though you don't show up on any commits.
I think you bring up a valuable point, Jessica, in that how we define adding value is a reflection of the company culture. And I would love to see topics like that addressed even before onboarding through the interview process by saying, here are our expectations for someone in this particular role. Here are the things that we value. So make sure that everything you do is in line with those values. Because I really strongly feel, everyone knows I have strong opinions about quote-unquote company culture. If you're not able to express your values, people can't live those values. And you have no culture if you're not living those values. So I think communicating those values, and I don't mean a mission statement, I don't mean an objective that some committee has written up, but communicating those and showing someone the way to act according to those principles should be a critical part of onboarding as well. I think it's just as important as understanding where in the code base, you should make the change.
Absolutely. And if you think those values that you shouldn't have to express them, that people should just pick them up, well, great. Your computer should just know what to do and you shouldn't have to tell it in code.
I've been waiting for that headband I put on my head, and I can just think of it.
And we know how that works out for you, Charlie.
I haven't gotten one yet. I want one.
Yeah, but we have that. That's a good thing. We wish we had a headband to just hook up to our heads and tell the computer how to work. But we think we have that with people.
That's so true. That's so true.
Yeah, it's hard to communicate with computers when you can't figure out how to communicate with people.
Yeah. I think one other thing that we fail to recognize a lot, and I think this shows up in a lot of the other areas that, we struggle in kind of the social justice areas of our community, is that we assume that we can kind of quantify somebody as one thing. And this happens with new people on the team, for example, so they're the noob. So we just bring everybody in the same way and handle them the same way. And it just doesn't quite work that way. I mean, everybody is going to pick different things up. They're going to learn different things different ways. They're going to contribute in different ways. And it's the same thing with, bringing people into the community and bringing people into these other areas that we work in and socialize in as coders. And me bringing somebody on who's a lot like me and me bringing somebody on who's a lot not like me, those might need to be two different processes. Or I need to be mindful of how I want them to contribute because they have a different skill set or a different personality.
I think that touches on something pretty important, Chuck, and that is, especially if your interview process or your company is trying to focus on bringing in diverse candidates, one of the ways you can set someone at ease with, whether they're a different race or religion or gender or what have you than you are, is showing them role models who look more like them and who have more in common with them. So I think adjusting the onboarding process to, like, just when you talked about having a spin-up buddy. So if you are, for example, a person of color coming into a company, I think it might be important for you to see other people of color being effective in the organization and someone that you can talk to and commiserate with and get some reassurance from so that you don't feel all alone. So your difference doesn't make you feel other.
Yeah. And so, even though my spin-up buddy isn't a woman, he set up a bunch of meetings for me with different people in the organization that I should know. So while I was on site, I had, you call it a coffee, but really it just means the talking part is important. The coffee part is optional. With various people, and many of those were women.
I heard of one company that actually, for the person's first week on site, set up a women's lunch for her to attend, just to get to know a cross-section of people at the company and also to not feel alone as, a rare woman in tech.
Yeah, I think also, though, it's important just to note that if you sit down and talk to somebody, you can immediately figure out, hey, you are bent this way. You feel important when you contribute this way. You like to jump into problems in this manner. And that's not the way I work or the way I think, but then I can actually say, then I feel like if you jump in and contribute over here, or you contribute in this way and play to some of the strengths that you have demonstrated you have, then you can feel like you belong.
Chuck, I think you would make a good senior developer. I think you illustrate a lot of those characteristics that you mentioned earlier.
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
I'm saying that the way you're talking about, noticing how a person works, noticing where they contribute, noticing how they learn and how they react to different learning things, that's exactly the kind of characteristics that I want in a technical leader.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I've done that before, and I've had that work out. I've also made the mistake where I assumed that somebody was just like me and then had it blow up in my face because it turned out that they really weren't.
Or just like somebody else who was different from you, but they're in their own category.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Chuck, you mentioned something earlier about people not just falling into one category. One way to go with that is a person can be really good at one thing and really bad in another way. And people just, just because you like somebody doesn't mean they're great in all situations. That's another thing that I've seen be problematic. It's not specific to onboarding in any way, but in general in organizations. What do you mean that person was mean to you? They're nice. They must never be mean. You must be wrong.
That just reminds me, my wife used to be a preschool teacher, and, inevitably there'd be one kid that would kick up a real fuss periodically. And she'd have the parents come in and they'd be like, my Johnny would never do that. Where everyone has this perception that they're the nice guy or the nice girl or the bad guy or the mean person or whatever. And it's like, that's not been my experience with them, but
it's kind of the reverse of fundamental attribution error. Of you get an opinion about what kind of person they are, and then you can't even see or believe behaviors that would contradict that opinion.
Yep.
So that's tricky about onboarding too, is you get first impressions, you get short experiences, and it's easy to start putting people in categories and deciding they're not useful here or they belong over there, when the team and the person are still exploring each other.
And I think you're under so much pressure when you're new on the job. You may not be at your best because you may be really stressed, maybe hyper-focused on what people are thinking of you and trying to second-guess the values that the attributes that they will value the most. So you're not necessarily really being yourself in that circumstance.
Yeah, that's true.
I think a lot of communication plays into that. I mean, you have to be talking because otherwise you're going to make those mistakes. You're going to make a poor judgment, and on the other side, you have to make people feel like you hired them to be them and not somebody else.
Do you think that onboarding could benefit by reusing some of the time of the same people who are involved in the interview process? Because maybe they have a little bit more context about your background and where you're coming from, and they've seen some of your personality and some of your actions.
In an even more high-pressure environment?
That's clear. But that's the interviewing wrong, which is a whole other topic.
Yeah, I was going to say, that all depends on how good your interview process is. Because you may not have even gotten the right information to begin with.
You mean the resume is not enough?
Only if it's really, 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 really long.
I have a 4-page resume with pictures. Awesome. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, actually, I kind of feel like I'm almost cheating when I come into a company now, because not everybody, but some people there already know of me. That's an advantage. I mean, people have a first impression of us as Ruby rogues before we arrive, and oh my God, that helps with the pressure.
I would agree with that. I think that's something that I'm hesitant to talk about because I don't want to come off as, I'm bragging about it or whatever. But I definitely have met people who have a good sense of who I am based on the visibility that I have in the community. But that also brings with it a lot of pressure. To live up to those expectations.
Yeah, there's that.
We have editing on Ruby Roads. I don't always send I can't edit myself.
As much as bragging is like calling out my own privilege, because I'm really lucky to be able to do this.
Oh, I feel the same way. Chuck, do you have some questions from people? Should we shift over, or do you want to keep
out to suggest that?
Paul.
So the first question, and we can actually tie this back to onboarding people, but the first question is, with all there is to learn in the field, languages, frameworks, workflows, methodologies, etc., how do you decide what you spend time learning?
Whatever's interesting to me.
That's what I was going to say. If it's fun.
That's what I do, and I tend to let projects guide the technologies that I choose. So, if I'm working on a project that is just mainly informational, that may not be stretching me technically, but I may have to beef up some CSS skills or what have you. But I think it's also valuable to learn, get a sense of where your company is going with technology, and maybe engage in side projects that will bring you some familiarity with those.
Yeah.
With those new technologies.
The other one that I pick is, I know absolutely nothing about that, and I go pick those things.
Yeah, there's a second category besides, wow, that's interesting, I want to check it out. There's the category of objective-driven learning, which is like Coraline said, okay, I really need this CSS to do something that moves this picture out of the top left. That's about the level I'm working on in CSS. And when I hit those questions, I need to do some research, about half again as much research as necessary, just go a little deeper, so you understand a bit more broadly the concepts you're dealing with. Get one level past the particular detail you need. Stuff like, okay, I managed to move it out of the bottom left, and I did that with a style tag, and with that style tag, I could have done these other 3 things, kind of level. Mm-hmm. And I'm not passionate about CSS, well, not in a positive sense, but it's useful. So that's driving me to do a little bit of research, but not so much that I give myself a headache.
Yeah, for me, it really comes down to, is it interesting? Does it give me deeper knowledge in the things that I use every day? Or does it get me back to that beginner status? Because I feel like having that beginner status kind of inspires some creativity for me.
Abdi, you have to chime in on this one.
He only learns enough to do bite-sized videos about Ruby at a time.
Yeah, that's it. I feel like I have a few categories of things that I learn. So there's like, number one, there's becoming adept at a few things. So, I think it's really important to have a few technologies that you're just extraordinarily comfortable with. And so that, when the time comes to tackle a problem, you're like, yeah, I have one tool, I know how to use it for this. So, for me, for years, that technology, one of those technologies has been Ruby. Another of those technologies has been Emacs. These are things that I try to get better at because I want to have that one go-to thing that's like, okay, I don't know all the tools that can solve this problem, but I know one that can, and I don't have to think about the solution too much. So there are like those things, and then kind of like what Chuck was saying, I look for some things that I sincerely think will stretch my thinking in some direction. So like, if you know Python or you know Ruby, it's not a huge stretch to learn the other. And some people will probably argue with that, but it is a stretch to learn, Haskell or something, or Prolog. So I look for those things that will stretch me. I look for things where there's not just some tool maturity, but also some knowledge maturity out there. There are an infinite number of things coming across my desk every morning, but I try to look for technologies where I can learn something learn some practices that won't be out of date tomorrow. These days there are very few areas where I'm willing to learn something that's just like totally cutting edge, because it's kind of like a generational garbage collector. Like 95% of the objects get wiped out in the first generation. It's like they turned out to be short-lived. And then you have that 5% of objects that survives, into the next generation, and that 5% of objects that survive into the next generation are probably going to survive into the next 5 generations. So there are very few things, unless it is directly pertinent to something I'm working on, or unless it just really catches my eye and just seems fascinating to me. There are very few things that I will allow myself to just read up on something that's extremely new and untested.
There's a lot of overhead to that too, when you're the only place that your questions are answered are on the mailing list.
If they're, yeah.
Yeah, and you need blogs, and when there's blogs, when there's tutorials, when there's opinion pieces.
Yeah, it's like, if I were working full-time on a React-based website, based front end, then I would probably be scarfing down all the, the latest and greatest cutting-edge information I could about React. But since I'm not, I'm not reading articles about it. I'm just making sure that I'm aware that it exists and what it's good for. And, sort of broadly, I try to stay broadly aware of what's out there, what's available. Yeah, so those are kind of my categories. There's the few things that I want to get really adept in. There are the things that stretch my brain, and then like if I'm working on something, that's about the only time that I'll try to stay on the bleeding edge. And I think I mentioned it on the show a while back, but I actually took my mental list of programming languages to learn and kind of brutally pared it down recently and made a list of like, okay, here are the ones that I think are actually going to make a difference in my thinking, and the rest I'm not going to say that I'm going to learn someday. I'm just going to say I'm not going to learn them unless a particular need comes up for it.
So I'm a moderator on the Ruby IRC channel, and something interesting happened yesterday where someone was asking about what modules in standard lib to study. And they talked about the classes and modules that they had already studied. So they were making a really systematic survey of the Ruby language. I think which brings up the question for me of like, how do you learn a new technology? How do you I guess we're getting off topic a little bit here, but we do have a question out there in terms of code reading. So how do you go about learning something new?
I think the biggest piece is just writing things. Trying to write things in it and finding out where I run up against a wall of misunderstanding. And then trying to tackle that wall. I also do a lot of fairly systematic learning. I'm a huge proponent of finding a good book, as opposed to trying to patch something together with blog posts and Stack Overflow articles and stuff like that. I really, really like stabilized information sources.
I mean, I'll chime in on this because the question was directed at me. Saw a code reading with James and I and David Brady. And we never did make another one. I did an episode of the Read the Source podcast with Eric Isaacson and Jamie Gaskins, and we talked about Clearwater.rb, which is a front-end framework written in Opal. But no, I haven't done much public code reading since then. But yeah, I mean, my approach to that is, I check out the README, probably run the tests, and then jump in and see what I can make it do as far as figuring that stuff out. And then if I do go into code reading, then yeah, I'll just start at the top level, and usually I'll be looking for what it does that I want to learn how it does, and dig through it from there.
We could tie that back to our onboarding discussion too. Reading the code that is existing in the code base, making time for that sort of systematic study might be a good way to sort of get your hands dirty in the architecture and really find the questions you need to ask.
Reading the existing code base is particularly satisfying when you're remote because no one can hear me when I curse about how
they don't get your WTF per minute.
All right, well, it looks like we were kind of winding down on this. Should we do some picks?
Sure.
All right, I'm just going to go left to right on my screen. Avdi, do you have some picks for us?
I don't think I got around to picking this one last time. When I do a lot of traveling around and working from coffee shops and stuff like that, and I like my internets to be private when I do that. And for a while, I was using an anonymous VPN for that called TorGuard. I think I probably picked it at some point, but I have had more and more trouble with TorGuard lately, just having really bad connections. And so I don't know, like a month ago or something, I asked around, and pretty much the unanimous suggestion was PIA, Personal Internet Access, Private Internet Access, I think is what it stands for. So I killed my TorGuard account, and I got an account with PIA, and it's been working really, really well. So I switched that on airplane Wi-Fi or coffee shop Wi-Fi or hotel Wi-Fi to make sure that everything's tunneled through a secure connection.
That's pretty rude hackers, don't you think, Abby?
I'm so mean.
Wow.
Really though, I feel like I'm it's tough love because I'm trying to make them better.
Right.
If you don't give them a challenge, then they'll never learn nothing. So
never get past the script kiddie stage.
Yeah, and who likes a script kiddie, honestly?
Right.
Yeah, I'll pick one more thing. I feel like people are coming up behind me. No, I feel like I get like an hour every 2 weeks to play video games these days, but I still occasionally do, and one that I've been playing lately is called Darkest Dungeon, and it's sort of a Lovecraftian influenced dungeon hack sort of thing. In many ways, it's like a stripped down dungeon hack kind of game, but they've also expanded it on some unusual axes. Particularly, there's a lot of, it being Lovecraftian inspired. Everybody is always all of the people are always way underqualified for the job, and at the point of stark terror and near death for like most of the adventure. So it's kind of an exercise in like managing your character's terror and stress and assorted emotional afflictions, which is an interesting take on the genre. But I've been getting a kick out of that game lately. Darkest Dungeon.
That's available on Steam, right, Abby?
Yeah, that's on Steam. So there's 2 picks.
All right, Coraline, what are your picks?
Okay, my first one is a gem that I actually am using right now. I'm implementing this at work. It's called Imprint. It's a gem that was released by Living Social. It helps you track requests across multiple log lines or even applications, basically by inserting a transaction ID into your logs, into all your relevant log files, log entries. There's a lightweight class and middleware, rack middleware to help you set tracing IDs. And the tracing IDs will appear in your app logs and help you relate calls that originate from a single request. And you can even insert that tracing ID that will persist across API calls between applications. So that's pretty cool, and that's coming in really handy if you have something like AppSumo or another log analysis application can help you tie information together so you can understand exactly what happened when a given user made a given request. So that's my first pick. My second pick is an article in Research Digest, and the way Research Digest works is they survey research papers that are published behind paywalls and sort of give you a summary of what their research was about. And this one in particular was called The Surprising Truth About Which Personality Traits Do and Don't Correlate with Computer Programming Skills. Not really a snappy title, but it summarizes the work of a researcher named Timo Knabs, who published his findings in the Journal of Research and Personality. And what Knabs did was scour the research literature looking for relevant studies that measured people's programming ability and measured their personality traits and intelligence and tried to correlate them. So he found 19 studies published between 1974 and 2014 that involved a total of about 1,700 people, 27% of which were women. And his research looks beyond intelligence to examine the role of things like introversion, conscientiousness, openness, disagreeableness, neuroticism as they relate to developer aptitude. The results of the study I don't want to give away because I should read the article, but they are surprising if you think of people as resources and not surprising if you think about developers as human beings first. So I'll link to that in the show notes.
Wait, we count as human beings?
Some of us.
Exactly, what kind of beings are we?
Can each of us count as more than one human being?
Myself contains multitudes.
Exactly.
All right, Jessica, what are your picks?
Okay, I'm going to pick these headphones that I'm wearing right now. They are Talon wireless Bluetooth headset from Firebird, and they just stay in my ears, and they're so comfortable. And I don't hate wearing them, and I can get up and close the window without dragging my laptop off the desk. They're made for exercising, for like running. I even wore them biking, which was probably a bad idea, but they totally worked. Yeah, so the batteries only last about 3 hours, and then you like plug them into your USB port to charge. It's like a micro USB. But they just work really well and smoothly, and I like them. And you can buy them on Amazon if you want them. Second pick, there's one thing that I've particularly been enjoying lately, and it's a book, and it's the kids' book. Like, they say ages 8 to 12 or something, but it totally goes way younger. And my girls and I have been reading a chapter every night in this series, and it's just delightful. It's called The Penderwicks. And it's a family of 4 sisters and their mother died when they were little. And they just go on vacation. Or they stay at home. And there's like no magic. There's no aliens. There's no zombies or vampires. It's just like ordinary people who are adorable, and they're like little dramas that and my kids get so excited, and I love reading it. The end.
I'm going to double down on your pick of reading to your kids. That is honestly one of the best things that I do every evening. I absolutely love doing it. We've been reading the Chronicles of Narnia, which are fantastic books. And we just finished The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. My kids are, pestering me about which one's next and what's going to happen. And anyway, way fun. So definitely going to second that. One other pick I have, and for a long time I really hated LinkedIn, but I'm going to pick LinkedIn just because I've been able to connect with a whole bunch of awesome people on there.
Did you finally figure out what it's for?
It's for
recruiters.
I don't have a great answer for that other than that I have been able to connect with people on it. Twitter is still more effective for me to connect with people. In fact, as we are speaking right now, I have 109 direct messages I still have to read in Twitter, but that's another tale for another day. But overall, I have been enjoying just, I actually, what I do is I go in and I randomly look up Rails people who are like second connections and just see what they're putting into their profile and what they've got going on. I don't spend a ton of time doing this, but I do some and it's just been nice because sometimes I'll see that I looked at their profile and then they'll send me a message or something or want to connect, and then I get to actually, interact with them and find out what Rails developers are looking at these days. So,
You're using it like OK Developer.
OK Developer?
For OK Cupid.
Oh, right. I guess. But yeah, so I've made some friends, I've made some connections, and overall I've just really been enjoying the interactions that I've been getting from it. I've also been doing the same kind of thing on Twitter, so that's why I have so many DMs. But it's been really nice just to connect. So if you want to connect with me on either of those platforms, then by all means, go ahead and do so. I'll put links in the show notes to those. I also want to quickly pick, I've started a morning routine, and one of the things I do in the morning is watch technical training videos for 20 minutes in the morning. And I have this huge backlog of 2 video series that I have been subscribed to forever, and I've been catching up on them. One of them is Ruby Tapas by Abdi Grimm. I think I'm on episode 170-something. I'm not sure. I need to check. The other one is Elixir Sips by Josh Adams, and both of those are awesome. And it's really interesting just to kind of have a comparison, because I'm now to the point where they both come out on a similar schedule, so I'll have one Tapas and then one Elixir Sips, and then one Tapas and one Elixir Sips. And they're not covering the same topics, but the approaches are different, and the way that the languages work are different, and so it's kind of fun to just kind of get this, okay, now you have to think about this in the functional style, and now you have to think about this in the, if it's a procedural thing in Ruby, like, I just watched testing sleep, the sleep call, and all that stuff, and there was some dependency injection that went on there with blocks to get the functionality for it to sleep versus count the number of times it slept and things like that. But anyway, so, seeing that in Ruby Tapas and just seeing how the different things work differently from each other, and at the same time, some of the things that Jose pulled into Elixir from Ruby and how those are similar and how they're different. So anyway, that's kind of my staying a beginner, because I really am a beginner with Elixir, but it's keeping me fresh and keeping me excited about learning new stuff over there. So, long-winded picks, but those are my picks. So I guess we'll head toward wrapping up. If you like the idea of us doing a Q&A, then tweet at us and let us know, and I'll see if we can get another one of these scheduled here in a month or so.
Chuck promises to send out the email ahead of time.
Next time. Yeah. The best way to be notified of that is either to follow Ruby Rogues on Twitter, @RubyRogues, or you can join the mailing list. In the mailing list, you just get emails about episodes. You get an email every week, basically. If there's something else going on, occasionally I send something out, but not very often at all. Probably once every 3 or 4 months. But yeah, if we're doing a Q&A, I'll send it out to that list to be sure. So those are probably the best ways to know about it, and then we'll also announce it on Parlay, Ruby Rogues Parlay.
Ooh, if we're talking about mailing lists, can I plug mine again?
Yes.
So yeah, issue number 4 of my newsletter just went out, and
it's really good.
Everybody who's getting it really seems to like it. I've been getting some really nice comments back, and what's better, I've been getting some great replies, which is one of the big reasons that I started doing it, because I really wanted to have more one-to-one interaction with people at greater length than Twitter enables. So it's very much a reply-enabled and encouraged kind of medium, and I'm doing a lot of sort of commentary on stuff there that I'm just not doing like on my blog and stuff like that, and people seem to like it. So anyway, you can go to sigavdi.email to sign up for that.
You've been on a drag circuit for the game?
I have, and yeah, a lot of it's influenced by the software development and reality construction book that I'm still working my way through.
Me too.
Awesome. All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the broadcast. Thanks for everyone who watched live. If you're getting this, I hope you enjoyed it. Catch you next week.
Hosting and bandwidth provided by the Blue Box Group. Check them out at bluebox.net. Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more. Would you like to join the conversation with the rogues and their guests? Want to support the show? We have a forum that allows you to join the conversation and support the show at the same time. You can sign up at rubyrogues.com/parlay.